But I'm very happy to be here for this conversation with Dr. Shashi Tharoor.
Thank you, Nitin, for that introduction. I am indeed chairman of the Standing Committee on Information Technology, but that's as of late September, early October. So it's not that I've had vast domain expertise built up in the 2 or 3 months I've had a chance to look at this. The committee looks at all aspects of our digital economy, to take your subject, including, of course, governance issues, including cybersecurity issues, which was the subject of one of our more challenging meetings. We've also had some controversies around certain issues in the committee, so it's been off to a lively start. The bill that we had clamored for some time, the data protection bill, our committee has been bypassed on that, and a joint select committee has been set up, chaired by a BJP member. I suppose that the government's majority entitles them to do what they like, but so a key issue that has been on the committee's agenda, and which the committee has been asking for a draft of, has actually gone away elsewhere. It so happens that before coming into this position, I had myself presented a private member's bill on data protection to the Parliament, so I have some views on the subject. I'm happy to address that if anyone's interested. But I no longer have the responsibility of chairing the process that will review it. The committee also looks at the Telecoms Department, the Postal Department, and the Ministry of Information Broadcasting. So that takes up some of our time and doesn't, of course, concern the issues that are right now before you, so I won't go into that. That's on the broad remit. As far as policy is concerned, I think it's fair to say that we've seen a steady evolution in governmental thinking, both amongst the political classes and amongst the bureaucracy, and that there's a fair amount of buy-in now across all segments that significant progress has to be made and that it's worth investing in. One of the issues, for example, that is looming for us, and which we've asked some questions about already and may have to meet before too long, and is this entire business of the movement towards 5G. Policy considerations come in. There is no doubt that the US has been talking to many countries who might otherwise be inclined to encourage Huawei to participate, against the wisdom of that. As of now, Huawei is one of the countries eligible to participate in India's trials, and that process is to be underway, I think, fairly shortly. So there is definitely a lot happening that will touch the lives of pretty much everyone in this room, and of course millions outside it. So that's where, by way of the broad orientation of my involvement in this. And I'll turn to you, Nitin, for whatever you'd like to discuss. I should mention the debate on the President's address is going on, and I did get a warning that there was a possibility, not yet confirmed, that the Prime Minister would reply, and since I spoke in the debate, it would be extraordinarily discourteous not to be there for his reply. So if there is any sign of his emerging, I will have to cut this short and run away. Just want to apologize in advance. Okay, Nitin, your question.
If he'll answer me, I'll give his replies.
He'll know it better than me, believe me.
Now tell me, I think the focus of this discussion here, the focus of this discussion here has been very much on issues of competition. And if one could pick on one of these, the potential impact of digitization of the economy on what will happen in this country to poverty, inequality, etc. One of the key features of e-commerce, for instance, is disintermediation, the direct contact between the seller and the buyer, and a whole lot of wholesalers, sub-wholesalers, retailers, etc. get, so to speak, out of the system. It's still not as big a problem as people think. Even in a country like the United States, only 10% of retail sales are through online. Ours will be much lower. But potentially this could happen. If that is the case, it would really pose major problems in India, where probably this intermediate sector, the intermediation sector, the wholesalers, sub-wholesalers, retailers probably account for 40–50%. So I think one of the questions that came up from this was the potential impact of the digitization of the economy on inequality. Would you have any reflections on that?
I think that there's a paradox at the heart of this entire issue, which is that there is definitely going to be, as the advocates of digitization have always argued, greater equalities in some levels, and at the same time the springing up of new inequalities. I'll take an unrelated field, take agriculture for example. Why are farmers largely poor? Many will tell you it's because all the money is being made by the intermediates. The wholesaler, the fellow in the mandi, is the chap who's making the money. Whereas if the farmer could sell directly to somebody, for example, who could then deal directly with the consumer, or if the farmer could better still sell his product without having to have anybody in between him and the ultimate consumer, then he would do better. The same logic does apply to many manufacturers. The intermediates are the ones taking off, as it were, a share of what they might make. So you could argue that there will be poorer people at the bottom of the chain who will actually become less poor because the cut of the intermediate is disappearing. But as you rightly pointed, then the intermediate becomes poor because he doesn't have an opportunity for income. So there will be potentially both a reduction of inequality and an increase in other people's misfortunes, which could create new inequalities. When you look at it'll almost vary from domain to domain. When you look at every transformation, I mean, you and I went to university, Nitin, at a time when it took 5 different steps to cash a check in a bank. Right? You went to one place and had the check presented, another one to get your token, a third one to actually have your account verified. Somebody wrote something in one ledger, then you took it to a 4th place, a fellow wrote in another ledger, and the 5th place you got your cash. And it was 5 stages for something as simple as that. Now you could say the moment we streamlined our processes, you could do it in one fell swoop, you were throwing 4 people potentially out of work. Wasn't that a promotion of inequality? Ultimately, change comes, and when change comes, it's defensively better in many ways, and at the same time, it does cause some short-term damage, but it provokes other possibilities. There may be lots of poor people today who have no work, who will be now employed in the business of delivering products that you've ordered online. And those are people who are currently, perhaps in many cases, either completely unemployed and conceivably below the poverty line, who will suddenly become employed. So there will be some people who will be affected in between the chain and others who will find new work. Inequality has risen in India. There's no doubt about it. Over the last generation, I'm told that our place in the Gini coefficient has got very much worse. Not perhaps as bad as some other countries. China, for example, was largely an equal society before their economic experiments began in the late 70s, and they're a very unequal society today. And in the Western world, there was a study, I'm afraid I don't have that at the tip of my fingers at the moment, but there was a study in which they traced, I think, inequality in something like 23 major economies, and inequality had increased significantly in about 18 of them. Can we blame all this on the fact that computerization, digitization, online activity, etc., also increased in the same period? I don't know. Maybe it's a coincidence, maybe there's some causality, but it's very difficult to draw clear conclusions. Another interesting thing, though, is that there was an annual exercise in Davos about the topics that the people attending Davos thought were important to the world to connect. And apparently for the first time in the last 3 years or 4 years, inequality has begun appearing in the top 5 or 6 topics. I read an article making that point. So suddenly the world is waking up to the fact that we have a problem here and that it needs to be addressed. And so the more people delve into the depths of these things, perhaps the greater clarity we'll get on the answer to your question.
Thank you very much. Just one reflection on that, perhaps something for the, you've got to go?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Okay. Let's just quickly then have a few words from you on the whole issue of privacy and data protection, because this is something in which you have a strong interest, and we will then take it from there.
Well, I mean, there are 2 or 3 things about the data protection issue. One is very clearly we all need it. It's in the interest of every one of us, because we are constantly giving data at any point in time, just to do anything in life. I mean, you're going online, you're giving data, you open a bank account, you're giving data, get a visa to go somewhere, you're giving data. What happens to all this data? How can it be used, misused, etc., is a fundamental question that affects all of us. So When I spent a bit of time on this as a private member, not as a member of the committee, and came up with a sort of bill, a private member's bill, my intention at that point was simply to put in legislative language, with the help of lawyers, some principles that I thought were important that are value to all of us. The first and most fundamental principle from my point of view was that the individual who generates data has to be the owner of that data. So, just as any other aspect that belongs to us or that's created by us is ours, data too, the principle should be recognized legislatively of data ownership by the person generating the data. Once you have established that principle, you then will create conditions under which some of that data can be surrendered voluntarily or made available, but always for a specific purpose and ideally for a specifically limited duration of time. So, if you need to surrender certain kinds of information in order to make a transaction, in order to open a bank account, in order to get a visa, whatever, the person receiving that data in India is somebody who can only use it for that purpose for which it has been sought. And if the data is then retained beyond a certain point of time when that purpose is over, let's say, for argument's sake, you are giving data in order to gain admission to a particular facility. Once you've left that facility, that data should be ideally destroyed, but at the very least placed in a fashion that others cannot have access to it. The data reverts to you. It is yours from this point onwards. The other concern, of course, is the government. The government sometimes has legitimate and authorized reasons for having access to your data, or even sometimes for intruding on your data. Certainly, if you are a beneficiary of government services, the government is entitled to have information about you in order to remit money to you, for example, or offer you subsidies or whatever else it may be. But beyond that purpose, should the government suddenly be able, for example, to take data you've given in order to get a subsidy and then apply it against your tax returns to see if you've been cheating on your taxes? Fair question, to which my answer is, unless the purpose has been specified, they should not. Then the question that comes up is, in what circumstances, for example, if government has suspicions about you, can you allow government to hack into your data? My answer is never. It should be illegal for the government to hack private citizens' data. In specific cases where surveillance is required for reasons of national security or whatever, a due procedure must be created, ideally involving the equivalent of a warrant. I mean, just as nobody can walk into a house and search it without a warrant, similarly, they should not be able to commandeer your data without some sort of lawful purpose recognized by an independent authority. I had suggested the creation of a data protection authority. So does the government's draft bill. But the government's draft bill, with all respect to the distinguished civil servants on this podium, is staffed entirely by government officials. That, to my mind, is not an autonomous, independent body. My version of a data protection authority would have had people from a judicial background, people who are just ordinary consumers and generators of data, ordinary members of the public, as well as a government official or two, as the case may be. But the preponderant balance would not have rested with the authorities, because the principal purpose of the independent authority would be to check abuse, which is most easily conducted by governmental authorities. So I think it's important for us to recognize that. And then, of course, at the end of the day, exceptions, how are exceptions authorized, what are the safeguards and protections? The government's bill essentially just requires the government to certify in one sentence that they have found it necessary to do something, and they can go ahead and do it. That's simply unacceptable in a democracy. And it seems to me once again that we are falling a long way short of the kinds of democratic standards that in other aspects of our life we have upheld, not just in the Constitution itself, but over 70 years of judicial interpretations of the Constitution, which have, if anything, erred on the side of greater liberalism. The word privacy, for example, or the word dignity are not mentioned in the Constitution, but both have been found to exist inherent in the rights of Indian citizens. And if your privacy and your dignity have been recognized by the Supreme Court for 70 years, then very clearly, it seems to me, those also would apply to issues of the data that you generate and that need to be protected. So the government has, as I said, offered this issue to a select committee, which will have a ruling party majority and be chaired by an MP of the ruling party. I will not be on it. But there will be other voices, of course, of the opposition on that committee. It's a joint select committee. Equally, they have publicly declared their willingness to receive suggestions from the public. So people like you who've taken time to think about these things, who've actually spoken about them, discussed them, examined pros and cons, all of you should very seriously think of offering suggestions. The chairman of the committee is Meenakshi Lekhi. You can write to her. She's an MP. Her address is easily found. Give her your suggestions, or write officially to the speaker and ask him to pass it on to the committee. But the committee, to the best of my knowledge, hasn't yet had its first meeting, and it was supposed to turn in its report at the end of the current session of Parliament. So there's not a lot of time. The session of Parliament will end on the 3rd of April. So whatever happens, everyone concerned, including those of you who wish to give your views, need to move fast.
Thank you.
No, it's okay. I think we've got.
No, I think the point is raised. This is a very crucial point, and my recollection is that Justice Sri Krishna, who wrote the report, has also raised some questions about the bill.
Yeah.
And this is.
I was disappointed in his draft, and he's disappointed in the government's draft. So you can see how far down it's gone.
So I think this is a crucial area which requires careful thinking, because if it's not just this, it's simply that you're moving to an economy and a world which will be information-based. In fact, that's the theme of data colonialism, which is coming up, that the new resource is information. And already today, people using big data are utilizing this information. You must have seen it when you look at your Google mail. Have you noticed that the advertisements on the right are connected with the content of your message? That if your message is that I'm traveling to Jaipur, the advertisements on the right will all be about hotels in Jaipur.
MakeMyTrip.com.
And it'll be all about hotels in how. Somebody's reading your mail.
An algorithm is what they.
I understand, but I'm saying it amounts to that. Now, all of it will be at a remove. That algorithm is a harmless one. But there are algorithms in China which catch on words like human rights, and things like that. Now, those are different. So I would say that this is a very, very crucial issue, and those of us who have any interest in this, because this is not a matter of, it is in some ways connected with issues of competition also, because it connects, this data privacy and data colonization are connected. Data colonization would not be not be an issue if you did not, if you had data privacy. For instance, Europe has standards on this, which make it obligatory for Google and others to remove information about an individual. And there are strategic dimensions. When our Prime Minister goes and visits Mr. Trump will have at his hand all of the searches that our Prime Minister has made on Google. Our Prime Minister will not have anything on what Trump has done. So this is an asymmetry which we have to live with because of data colonization. You know where all those are? What 70% of all that you do through your email and everything is processed in a series of big data centers around Washington. 70% of the world's internet flows through those centers in Washington, all of them readily accessible to the agencies of the US government. So be careful. This is an area which is going to be a major issue for our children and grandchildren. So we should better start doing this, both domestically as well as internationally. May I now turn to a slightly different story, which is the placing of what India is doing in a global context. Many people say that today Ajit Balakrishnan has written a piece in the Business Standard. Ajit Balakrishnan, as you know, is a major pioneer in
Readeth.
Yeah, he's a major pioneer in the. Now he's written a piece, and he basically has raised questions about the adequacy of our policies. In fact, I just want to read the last sentence of his piece, which I happen to have here, because I just read it today. And he's questioned whether it is really possible for us to do what he says is, it will take a mega effort to update India's competition laws, laws dealing with foreign direct investment and taxation, laws dealing with venture funding, if we are to realize our full national potential from e-commerce. Essentially, the issue is, are we just simply going to be part of a small colony of half a dozen major American firms? Or are we going to be an independent entity, as China is to a certain extent? So the broader issue of how to place e-commerce, if you like, the digital economy policy in a broader international context. And I just wondered, Shashi, whether you have any thoughts on this.
Well, I must admit I haven't made up my mind on it. I am a bit divided because both arguments have their own emotional appeal. Certainly when one speaks of things like data colonialism and the need to resist being colonized again by big foreign companies instead of the East India Company was a big foreign company to begin with, and we know how they did things. So there is that emotional argument against it. But conversely, there's the other emotional argument that says, why are we any better off if a big Indian company is to take our money and our data as opposed to a foreign company? The foreign company is only interested in making money off us. These guys are collecting all sorts of stuff which they will then share with the government to intrude into our lives. So surely we're better off being subject to the Western companies because their motive is purely materialistic and commercial and nothing else. I don't know, and I think one will have to look at the pros and cons. I mean, as you know, the counterpart of this issue is data localization, which has become a new theme. Some people talking about how data generated in India should be stored in servers in India, and others saying that it's not simply practical for them. Certainly, global social media sites have come to see me in a bit of a panic, Google and Facebook and so on, saying the entire point of their system is that's a global conversation. So how do they tweet, let's say share, how do they store, for example, a tweet Nitin Desai issues in India has to be stored in India, but has to be read in the US and maybe replied to by Donald Trump in the US, whose thing has to be stored in the US, and then there'll be a comment by an Indian in Dubai who doesn't have a UAE passport. Is his or her data to be stored in India, in the UAE, or in Google's parent servers? Or on Twitter's parent servers. So you've got these incredibly complicated challenges arising in terms of how to implement laws. If Mr. Balakrishnan thinks we should be writing new laws, good for him. The problem in India has never been the writing of laws. The problem has been the implementation of those laws. And I think this one is going to, this would place a tremendous burden of compliance on companies and others. Now, if the alternative for some companies would be to say, listen, we just can't comply and therefore we would no longer offer our services to Indians or in India, then what happens to all of us? And then again, let's say for argument's sake, they announce they're pulling out of India. Let's say Twitter pulls out of India. What is to prevent an Indian from logging into Twitter through a VPN onto their site internationally and continuing to maintain its Twitter? I don't think it's going to come to that, since the second biggest Twitter user in the world is Narendra Modi, so I don't think the government is going to let it come to that. But the point still is that it's an example of how do we, the Chinese solution, which is essentially to create your own national internet and shut off the world, so that you can't go on Google from China and you can't access your Gmail from China and so on and so forth. That is not only incredibly drastic, it's also terribly undemocratic, and it's not something that, it seems to me, would be compatible with India's international commitments, interests, and connections. And in those circumstances, I think we have to tread very sensibly, looking into all the consequences. This is going to be, rather than be carried away by emotional slogans on either side of the argument, we will have to look at the practical consequences of whatever measures we may contemplate to address the concerns that people are expressing. So I thought your example was an outstanding one of how it is that potentially President Trump could be reading a list of Prime Minister Modi's searches, except that under American law he can't, because Google will not make it available to him.
I'm afraid that's not true. I'm afraid that they have access. This is the problem.
On the basis of?
on the basis of the way they operate. And
No, because currently the Americans have a law in place under which Mr. Modi's searches cannot be given to a third party without Mr. Modi's consent. Same in Europe. So no European Prime Minister, Boris Johnson is no longer a European, of course, but any other one of those, if he goes and sees Merkel, she won't have that advantage over him either. So I'm just curious. I mean, I think if we have laws that can protect the person who owns the data, and other countries have similar laws, we might be able to navigate past that thing. But the example is an interesting one, that if indeed everything is in the US, surely it puts the US in a position of advantage. But in that case, why are they so scared, for example, of Huawei right now? It's because
they're afraid of losing their dominance. That is the reason why. Today, the reality is that if you look at the internet-based companies, the majority, apart from three or four Chinese companies, are all US. But anyhow, I think your point is well taken.
Actually, strictly speaking, Google, I think, has made us sign up an acceptance thing which allows them to use it for their own commercial purposes. So Mr. Trump says, I will pay you $1 million for Narendra Modi searches. They can presumably consider that a legitimate
whatever it is, but we'll come back to it. I think the point that Ajit was making is a slightly different one. Today, my impression is that practically every internet startup in India's only aim is how quickly can they be bought out by one of the six American majors. That's all they want. So how quickly can I be bought out by them? You make a fortune out of that. The Bansals have made a fortune out of that, and so on. So we have to get beyond that. We have to get beyond that in some ways to see that we really have a truly independent set of internet-based operations and so on. Let me just...
One last question. You want?
No, I hope you'll not be coming.
No, I mean, I will have to go to Parliament, but I think the PM is not apparently on the anvil at the moment, so that should be all right. I had heard that he will speak tomorrow, so I was a bit surprised when I got this message.
We lost one member of Parliament, Rajiv Chandrasekhar, who knows the subject very well, because he's been issued a whip to stay in the House.
Yeah, I mean, we all have whips in the event of a likely voting, but I don't know. You see, the way it works is the debate goes on, and then you have the reply by the Prime Minister. But if you turn on your TV sets, you'll discover that he, at least not long ago, was in Lucknow. So, of course, he has his own means of transport and get back very fast without waiting for a scheduled flight. But I don't think that's happening right now. So Rajiv could have come because once the Prime Minister replies, then you have the vote on the motion of thanks, in which there will be votes because many of us will oppose or will put forward amendments to the motion of thanks, which some of which may be voted upon. So then the whip would be very seriously enforced. But till then, he should have come and spoken to you.
No, he himself was interested.
Well, he's actually a infotech and entrepreneur.
Nitin, we have to wind up.
Yeah. Well, I think we've been. I just wanted to thank Dr. Tharoor for finding time to come with us here. And I'm very happy that he was the chair of the Foreign Affairs Committee and should have continued as the chair of the
Thank you for saying that.
But anyhow...
For the first time in our entire history of Parliament, parliamentary committees, that the Foreign Affairs Committee is not chaired by an opposition member. From the days when Vajpayee Sahib was the chairman, it was always the tradition that the opposition would chair that committee. But it's unfortunate that there's a certain narrowing of our political space in this country today.
The world is changing, the world is changing.
And there we are.
There was way back, I have a story heard directly from Mr. Daskotra, that when he was a young officer in New York, he got a message from the then Prime Minister's office, Pandit Nehru's office, saying there's a young man coming to the United Nations as part of the Indian delegation. He is very good. He has a lot of potential. Make sure that you look after him well and that he really gets exposed to many things. And that young man was Atal Bihari Vajpayee. Okay? That was the difference. But whatever it is, I'm very happy that you could be here.
Thank you.
And though you may not be in the Foreign Affairs, this is still a very important issue. And with your strong concerns about issues of privacy, etc.,
that's why they've taken it away from me and given it to a select committee instead.
I know, but that will still not stop you. Still not stop you as the chair of this committee in playing a certain role in this exercise. So we are very happy that you are doing this, and we wish you well and all the best, and may you continue to thrive. thrive and prosper as you're doing now.
Thank you, Nitin Bhai. Thank you all.